The terrorists of the massacre, the terrorists, the terrorists.
The terrorist of the massacre, the terrorist massacre, the terrorist. There was nothing to give, not a single can of sardines.
You can probably tell where I am since it's just an empty room. That's right, I'm inside one of the vessels, one of the largest vessels to come in this Yom Kippur flotilla. And while we're processing this boat, there's one thing missing, guys. All the aid they were supposed to bring into Gaza explains something to me, and I'm sure to you too. When we and other countries offered to deliver this aid to the Gazans, we could ensure its safe arrival. Flatly rejected it. Now we see why. It was never about helping Gazans, but it was all about the headlines and the social media followings.
The images document the ships as dirty and disorganized, but without a trace of the supposed humanitarian aid they claim to bring for the Gazans. So we understand that they obviously rejected the idea of going to the port because their script would be left without props. On deck, the sequence was almost mechanical, just like in previous times. Communications cut off, electronic devices turned off, and the crew forced to remain silent with their hands up. The images captured inside the ships and released by the Israeli police. They even showed how several of them threw their cell phones into the sea, faced with the imminent entry of the Israeli Marines. What was on those phones that made them toss them into the sea? Was it their personal info? And surely hundreds of memories and family photos? Well, what do we know? Imagine how serious the situation must be. For you to have to throw your phone into the sea and lose everything you have, think about what's on your phone. Well, it's up to each person's imagination. What was inside these devices? The testimonies from inside tell it without embellishment. The soldiers ordered all devices turned off, leaving the ships in a digital void without cameras or transmissions. It was the prelude to the entry of the Israeli teams, who one by one took control of all the ships. The image that caused the most commotion wasn't at sea but in the detention center. Dozens of activists sitting on the ground, heads down, feeling the shame of having ended up there. After announcing that they would break the blockade and without delivering any of the aid they didn't bring, obviously, and in the middle of that scene, a video of Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir was released, shouting at them, "You are terrorists." In a tone more like a street scolding, he told them a few truths to their faces. Why not use a boat to block the sun? It wasn't about helping the people of Gaza, it was about pro-Palestinian propaganda, which ultimately only ends up benefiting the terrorist group Hamas. But not all cases are handled in the same way. In consideration of the good relations with Italy, Israel authorized the voluntary deportation of 4 Italian activists. That means they agreed to leave of their own free will and also taking on the costs of their departure. It's an important detail. It shows how Israel handles each case individually. And by the way, it sends a diplomatic signal to a European partner with whom it doesn't want to open unnecessary fronts. Although I imagine that the 49 Spanish activists won't have the same luck. So the vast majority of all those activists are still waiting. Hundreds of activists prosecuted, each with an open case file. While governments around the world file complaints and summon ambassadors, the president of Colombia made headlines again. The issue escalated to the economic and even the political level. Expulsion of the Israeli delegation from Colombia and the announcement to suspend the free trade agreement with Israel, a reaction that turns a maritime approach into one of the pretexts that Petro usually looks for to fulfill his anti-Israeli agenda. Regardless of the harm this can cause to a country, the breaking of such important agreements as the free trade agreement between these two nations. Obviously, we also have the case of Gretica, who we see here quite upset, but really, without saying anything, she denounced Israel's mistreatment. She specifically asked her to say what had been done to her. Well, she said she preferred not to say anything. Alright, the conclusion for now is simple. Israel left an unambiguous message. There will be no maritime corridors outside of its control. Whether they try one more time or 10 more times, the result will be the same. Interception on the high seas, equipment turned off, prosecutions, and return flights. The activists may boast about making headlines, but in the end, the question is something else. Did they want to deliver aid, or did they simply want to activate the cameras of pro-Palestinian propaganda? Because if it was the first, I repeat it again, there was no aid on the ships. Then we have the other side of the coin. Hundreds of far-left Islamist protesters stormed the Carrefours just because the flotilla had been intercepted in Israel. Again, pretexts that simply aim to inflame the West. The left is sick. It doesn't matter if they're in the government. Any excuse is good enough for them to go out and destroy the streets. That same wave of hatred that starts in a port in Gaza ends up setting fire to a major supermarket. If you want to keep up with what's happening here in Israel and in the region, this channel is for you, so subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Alright, and while detention was focused on the Mediterranean, an alarm sounded in Europe. First in Germany, where the police arrested 3 suspects for being part of a cell linked to Hamas. It wasn't just any raid. The authorities acted thanks to information shared from Israel, particularly by the Mossad, which reportedly provided key data to locate the suspects. During the searches, they found weapons and materials that the prosecutor's office said were ready for an attack. A story that shows how the shadow of the conflict in Gaza also creeps into the streets of Berlin. The other scene was much more intense, more regrettable, in Manchester, England. There, during Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, the Day of Atonement, a man identified as Jihad al-Shami, 35 years old, entered the Hinton Park synagogue armed and opened fire. 2 people were killed before the police shot him down. Hours later, more arrests were made in nearby neighborhoods in what appears to be a wider network of radical sympathizers. The scene was described by witnesses as a nightmare. Families who had come for prayer were interrupted by gunfire, children evacuated amid screams, and the building desecrated on the most solemn date for the Jewish people. These 2 incidents are neither a coincidence nor isolated events. They are part of a trend that has been growing since October 7, 2023. Antisemitism in Europe has skyrocketed. In the United Kingdom, the Community Security Trust documented figures close to the historic highs of attacks and threats against Jews. In Germany, the Research and Information Center on Antisemitism reports a drastic increase in anti-Semitic incidents, from graffiti to physical assaults. And perception studies confirm what the community already feels in their skin. The U-Polisa revealed that most European Jews today feel more insecure than just 2 years ago. What we're experiencing is a tsunami of antisemitism. These aren't just brief waves of hate, but a lasting current that sweeps everything along. Universities where boycotting Israel is normalized, social networks that amplify violent rhetoric, and European streets where wearing a kippah becomes an act of bravery. The tide is rising, and little by little it is flooding every space: schools, squares, stadiums, and even parliaments. And in a Europe like this, many Jews conclude that there is no future. But unlike the unfortunate Europeans trapped in that cycle within their own cities, the Jew does have a refuge. What is happening is creating an unexpected effect. A wave of anti-Semitism is pushing more Jews to make aliyah, that is, to migrate to Israel, and with each new wave of migration, Israel grows stronger. Meanwhile, Europe grows weaker. History repeats itself with an unsettling echo. During World War I, Europe killed many great scientists, artists, engineers, mathematicians, and countless Jewish intellectuals. But there were also survivors among them who brought their talent to what was then the desert of Israel, practically uninhabitable, and turned it into the emerging Israel. They were the intellectual and economic foundation on which it was built. A country that in just 80 years became the powerhouse of the Middle East with nothing to envy from many European nations. Today, Europe is making a similar mistake, with a different face, by allowing its culture to fragment. Under the pressure of political Islam and by allowing the resurgence of anti-Semitism, it is pushing a new generation of Jews, scientists, artists, engineers, athletes, mathematicians, entrepreneurs to emigrate to Israel. And with them, it takes away their knowledge, their capital, and their capacity for innovation. The result will be inevitable. An injection of talent and economic strength will make the young state of Israel even stronger. So for Israel's detractors, the effect is actually the opposite, is a negative effect for them, because the state of Israel is getting stronger. But the big loser will be Europe. Meanwhile, then the Europeans, English, French, Germans, they will have to watch as their cities erupt in riots, as their social fabric unravels, and as their future slips out of their hands. The Islamist and anti-Semitic tsunami is already here. And Europe seems to have forgotten that every time it lets itself be swept away by this current, it ends up weakened. Meanwhile, Israel grows stronger. Finally, we go to Gaza, where the war moves at a different pace but is just as relentless, while Hamas keeps considering its options. Let's see if they accept or not the 21-point agreement reached between the United States, Israel, and various Arab countries. The Israeli army claims it is about to close the pincers around Gaza City, with two divisions, the 99th and the 62nd, approaching from different flanks to isolate what remains of the Hamas leadership. After it closes, Israel will have full control over what enters and leaves Gaza City. It's not an open advance, but a surgical maneuver in the midst of devastated neighborhoods where every street could hide a tunnel and every house a trap. The objective is not just military, it's to cut off logistical lines, confine the fighters, and dismantle weapons depots. And of course, the main objective is to search for the kidnapped. In the midst of this advance, the pressure on civilians. Hundreds of thousands have already been evacuated from the combat zones, but many more remain there in Gaza City, not wanting to leave voluntarily, which leaves them caught in the crossfire and at risk of becoming casualties. Yesterday in Rafah is the best example. While humanitarian aid was being distributed, Hamas launched projectiles at the distribution area. There was chaos, but even so, the center reopened and people kept coming. Because literally they have no choice. The war gives them no respite, not even when they're looking for a food package. And what about when it's their own political party? Let's not forget that it was the Gazans who voted for Hamas's policies. And in the end, it's Hamas who has them in this situation. Well, Hamas is the one who's shooting at them right now. To prevent them from going for the aid, simply, they're not interested in the aid reaching the Gazans because they don't care about the Gazans. What they want to keep selling is the issue of genocide. In the political sphere, Israeli soldiers say they are finding documents, maps, cameras, and hidden ammunition depots in schools and civilian buildings. These findings serve as justification for each incursion. It's not just about conquering territory, but about exposing the infrastructure that Hamas embedded within the urban fabric of Gaza City. And each finding also becomes a key piece to show the reality of what Hamas is doing. There in Gaza City, where on the ground the situation is a war of attrition, Israel knows it can't just destroy everything uncontrollably. It needs to show precision, but also results. Hamas, for its part, is betting on urban resistance. Make every meter expensive and let time erode international patience. And in that struggle, it's the civilians who pay the highest price. What happens next depends on two things. If Israel manages to seal off Gaza City and suffocate Hamas's command networks. And if the international community intensifies diplomatic pressure, so that finally Hamas gives in to the ceasefire proposed by Israel and the United States. And what's at stake is not just the control of a city, but the narrative of who is right. In a conflict that has already set the Mediterranean on fire, stirred up Europe, and unleashed a tsunami of hatred in the streets of the world. In Israel and the region, our perspective extends beyond borders and doesn't only reach Europe. As you can see, everything that happens in this small land called Israel impacts the entire world. Don't leave without leaving your like, and if you enjoyed this video, share it, and of course, subscribe. See you